Chapter 21, Spiritual Belief. Learning Objectives. Compare the ways that different faiths have attempted to access spiritual states and describe the role of art in these practices. Outline some of the difficulties faced by various religions in giving their deities human form and describe some strategies for overcoming these problems. Characterize sacred space. Abstraction is particularly suitable for representing spiritual matters. Introduction. In 1768, when Captain James Cook sailed from England, one of the most distinctive art forms that Cook and his crew encountered was tattooing. One of the crew captured the tattooed face of a Maori warrior. Tattooing is an aspect of complex, sacred, and ritual tradition found throughout the Pacific Islands. The islanders believed that many individuals, places, and objects were imbued with mana. A person might increase their mana by skillful or courageous acts or by wearing certain items, including tattoos. Among the Maori, the most sacred part of the body was the head, and so it was the most appropriate place for a tattoo. Their design mirrors the human form and is meant to celebrate it. The Maori thought of the tattoo as art. Since the earliest times, the artist's ability to create has been associated with creation itself. Art represents a higher realm of experience that communicates that higher realms might exist. So Sidney Parkinson was the artist on board at the time, and he would illustrate plants and flora, captured a Maori warrior with all of its tattoos. This is a real picture of the Maori warrior. The Maori use their tatau or the tattoo with bilateral symmetry. So both sides of the face were the same, and sometimes the tattoos would go down the back of the body as well. But the head was the sacred space for the many of the tattoos. The tattooer was known as the Tuhunga Tomoko, and that was the Tuhunga was the expert. It was the expert tattoo artist that gave spiritual meaning to the tattoos. They used burnt kari gum for the pigment, and this tap 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 of the hammer on the tool would embed the ink down into the underneath the skin, and the tap tap is where the word tattoo came from. The women also got tattoos as well. The spiritual life of many of the world's peoples is informed by the belief that the forces of nature are inhabited by living spirits known as animism. Other polytheistic faiths believe that the divine takes multiple forms, represented by multiple gods and goddesses. In the world's monotheistic faiths, that of Judaism, Christianity, and Islamic faith, one God is the creator and the transcendent power of the world. Non-theistic faiths, like Buddhism, do not have deities, but followers cultivate a spiritual practice that will allow them to ultimately experience transcendence. Art plays multiple roles in the attempt to connect with the spirit world and attain spiritual states of being. The ancient Sand people of Africa attempted to connect with the spirits residing in nature through the rock art that survives in open-air caves. In their rock art, they would depict their dance, their long dance. Over in this area here, we see people lined up in this long dance. In this ceremony, they would enter through dancing a state of trance that would activate the noon. The whole community comes together around a fire for several hours or even an entire night, led by healers and elders. The healers dance around the fire, chant, and hyperventilate until they induce a powerful trance-like state. In this state, they are granted access to the spirit world. You dance, 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 then Num lifts you up in your belly and lifts you in your back, and then you start to shiver. Numb makes you tremble. It's hot. Your eyes are open, but you don't look around. You hold your eyes still and look straight ahead. But when you're looking around, because you see everything, because you see what's troubling everybody, numb enters every part of your body, right to the tip of your feet and even your hair. So this numb is a powerful energy that starts in your spine and works up the belly, and it causes people to shake and tremble, and eventually it takes the spirit out of the body, where the person can do battles with cosmic energies and deities and bring back information that benefits their culture. The concept of animism is also central to the spiritual lives of the Pueblo people of the American Southwest. Most Pueblo people believe that they originated in the womb of the Mother Earth. The Pueblo believe that Kachina spirits manifest themselves in performance and dance. Kachina dolls made for sale, however, are considered empty of any agency, power, or even significance. The icon images that adorn the walls and ceilings of Byzantine Orthodox churches, beginning in the 7th century CE, were believed to help the faithful communicate with the divine. We have a little Kachina doll here that was made by the Hopi culture, and these are little dolls that are set for sale. But the ceremonies of the Kachina, they do Kachina dances, and in the Hopi culture, they wear these masks, and the masks are an agency or vehicle for the spirit or the divine world to be interpreted by the dancer for information and for healing in their culture. The Kachina are spirits that dwell in nature. The Christ from Deesis mosaic in Hagia Sophia in present-day Istanbul is an example. This idea of using a divine image as a means of contacting the spirit world. The idea that an image could play a role in spiritual practice developed in Buddhism as well. This is the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, which was once Constantine. And this mosque was once a Christian church. It was built by the Eastern Roman Emperor Justinian as a Christian cathedral of Constantinople for the state church of Roman Empire between 532 and 537. Inside of the Hagia Sophia, we see mosaics. Mosaics are little chunks of clay. They are put on the wall like a fresco. It's a little bit more expensive than painting a fresco, and that's why frescoes kind of won out in the long run. But in this mosaic of Christ, this idea that through looking at this image, it could raise your level of contemplation. And in studying the eyes, it would help a devout worshiper for their prayers to be delivered to heaven. It's this idea that through this image of reverence, it would help one attain their spiritual needs through prayer. The representation of the Buddha in the frontispiece of the Diamond Sutra is an invitation to contemplate the writings within, which consists of a collection of the Buddhist sayings. One of the Buddhist disciples is right in here, Subhuti. He is asking the Buddha, how does one reach enlightenment? And the Buddha offers caution. He says not to become distracted by the appearances of things, not to become attached, because what we see is like a shooting star. It is a clouding of the sight of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble, a dream, a lightning's flash, a thundercloud. This is the way one should see the condition. Just like the Buddha's warning that we should not be attached to the appearance of things, we should also not be attached to the appearance of Buddha as well. The story of Buddha was that he was born in a wealthy family. He was a prince. He left his palace with his father one day and was unused to seeing the common person. When he saw people suffering along the roadside, he asked, "What is causing these people to live in such torment?" And he was told, well, people get old and then they die. They get disease. People go hungry. And this was very shocking to him. And he decided that he couldn't be a prince and live in a palace when there was so much suffering going on in the earth. So he cut off his princely topknot and threw it up in the air and vowed that if his ponytail, if it didn't come back down to earth, he would devote his life to seeking enlightenment. And that was one of the legends of the Buddha. His top knot stayed up in the air. He sat underneath the banyan tree until he reached enlightenment, which legend has it, it took several weeks of him sitting there before he was released from suffering, being non-attached to desire or fear. He reached a state of nirvana. The ancient Greeks installed sculptures of the gods in temples and monuments and worshipped them as cult images or idols. The Greek gods thought like humans, acted like humans, and spoke like humans in many myths. The Greeks believed that as long as they did not overstep their bounds and try to compete with the gods would protect them. As long as they didn't become filled with hubris and pride, the gods would look after them. The nearly 7-foot high bronze statue in the Archaeological Museum in Athens reveals a great deal about how the Greeks thought of their god. This is Zeus or Poseidon, and we see the Greeks thought of their gods as Olympians, like muscular, perfect looking, idealized Olympic athletes. The Greek gods didn't leave them commandments or issue any books about or writings about how they should live. The gods let the Greeks live as long as they weren't filled with pride. The gods would look after them. The Christian idea that Jesus was the Son of God made flesh found multiple styles of expression in works of art. In the Alba Madonna, Raphael perfectly balances both aspects of Jesus' being. So we see Mother with a book in her hands and the Christ child in his naked innocence is looking at John the Baptist and reaching out, holding the cross. The mother is looking out in contemplation about how she can protect her young child, as any mother would do. The Christ has this look of understanding and knowledge of what is going to take place in the future. At the start of the Protestant Reformation, Ulrich Zwingli instituted a program of iconoclasm in which churches in Zurich were purged of all religious images. A painting by Peter Serendam of a church dedicated to St. Bavo in Haarlem shows a typical Dutch Reformed interior stripped of all furnishings, its walls whitewashed by Calvinist iconoclasts. So the iconoclasts were the image breakers. In this painting, oil on panel, this interior of this church has been stripped of all of its paintings and whitewashed. The only content that we see is the lamp that is hanging down, is a triple tiara, possibly representing the Holy Spirit. But the walls and the architecture still have the Gothic arches, and we see the triangle in the altarpiece that looks like a Greek temple. So in the architecture itself, it still holds content that came from the Renaissance era. The Islamic faith believes that God, or Allah, is never to be represented in human form. Allah is referenced only in calligraphy by any one of his 99 names. For instance, the center of the star from a calligraphic scroll containing verses from the Quran features the name of Safi, the healer. So in this illustration, we see a radial balance where the name, the Safi, the healer, is in this concentric circle. It is in the very center of this mandala-like structure. Sacred space. To enter a sacred space is to find yourself in a place where the normal concerns of daily life are suspended. Architects and artists have responded to the challenge of creating this unique environment and investing it with symbols of the faith. A pilgrimage is common to many of the world's religions. Those of the Muslim faith are required to participate at least once in their lives in the annual pilgrimage to Mecca, known as the Hajj. One of the rituals of the Hajj is to walk 7 times around the Kaaba. Muslims believe the Kaaba is the place of their origin, the site of the first house of God. Beginning in the 13th and 14th century, images of Muhammad began to appear widely in illustrated manuscripts, that of the Shia. Muhammad placing the black stone on his cloak from Rashid al-Din's Jami al-Awraqiyya depicts a key story in the history of the Kaaba and the Muslim faith. In Saudi Arabia, that is where Mecca is, the cube or Kaaba that houses a sacred black stone from heaven. This is Muhammad who is placing the black stone on a cloak. There were many people standing around, and they were trying to decide who would have the honor of placing the black stone in the Kaaba to house it. And they decided, this group here decided that the first person that would walk by would get the honor. And so that person was Muhammad. And him being a spiritual leader as well as a political leader decided that it would be best if he placed the black stone on his cloak and allowed all of the tribesmen to grab a part of the cloak and they would all take it in together, thus uniting the different thoughts in the Muslim faith. The Japanese shrine. In Japan, the 3 sacred shrines of the Kumano are considered places of physical healing, depicted in a hanging scroll dated around the 1300s. The Kumano shrines are dedicated to the kami of the 3 Kumano mountains, Hongu, Shingu, and Nachi. Kami are the spirits that are embodied in the natural world. We see these 3 mountain sites that are for healing, and this site up here has a famous waterfall to it. This is known as the pilgrimage of ants. There are so many people making their pilgrimage to these sacred spaces for healing that they're like ant in a path. The Hindu pilgrimage place. In the Hindu religion, pilgrimages to the sacred spaces are especially important to spiritual life. Many pilgrimage sites include elaborate temples and shrines, such as the Kandiyarya Mahadeva temple, but it is the location itself that is first and foremost sacred. So when deciding what is going to be a sacred space or where a temple may dwell, first they have to consider, is this a place that God or Shiva would be comfortable in dwelling? It would need certain things. It would need a good water source, perhaps a beautiful lake or some water from wells. They would need to use the water to water these sacred groves of trees. There would need to be, the land would need to be cultivated for 2 years with crops. And then there would be a time where cattle would graze on it, thus purifying the land. The Hindus believed that the gods lived in the Himalaya mountain. In this temple, the Shiva, it takes on aspects of the Himalayas. When a pilgrimage or a person arrives they take off their shoes and walk around the temple before entering it. Walls have beautiful sculptures and an incredible rhythm and pattern in the walls of the temple. When a person takes their shoes off and moves into the temple, it's often dark inside, and they go to the altar of the lingam of Shiva for their prayers, and they sit in total darkness until they capture a glimpse of Shiva, and then they know that their prayers will be answered. Throughout the Middle Ages, it was likewise customary for Christians to go on religious pilgrimages to holy places or sites containing sacred objects. The Church of Saint Sernin in Toulouse, France, housed the relics of Saint Sernin. So these were places where they held sacred relics, and in Saint Sernin, they housed his bones, and he was martyred because he would not worship the Roman god. They tied Saint Sernin to the back of a bull, and he was dragged through the streets until his death. Many of these cathedrals in France were on kind of a roadway where people would visit these cathedrals in their pilgrimages. And this was the second one on the map in southern France. People believed that if they would go to a cathedral that housed spiritual objects, sacred objects, these holy relics, that the closer that they could get to these holy objects, the more likely that their prayers would be heard. Most of these cathedrals had sacred objects. It could be the chair of St. Peter or the tunic of Mother Mary. That brought people to these cathedrals. It kind of gave them a reputation, them more reputable and more powerful. The sacred spaces of many contemporary Native American cultures are more complex. The Native American cultures of the Southwest never comfortably assimilated Western religion. The decorative program of the Church of San Jose at Old Laguna Pueblo has the altar and the retablo or altarpiece ensemble created by the artist known as Laguna Santero. Pueblo and Christian traditions are unified in the design. So this is a combination of two different religions. It's known as a syncretic combination, a combined piece. We see the Christian tradition in this altarpiece. We see Saint Joseph holding the Christ child. Saint John is on the left, and that's Saint Barbara on the right. They are the patron saints in this altarpiece. Saint Barbara was known as the patron of people who work with explosives. So she's linked with lightning and thunder. Above Saint Joseph, we see the Trinity, we see Christ holding the cross, and then we see a Pueblo artifact, a buffalo hide with the religious icons of the Pueblo people. We see the sun with a serpent with horns coming out of it, a rainbow in the center with stars above it, and the moon to the right. And that reflects a certain unification and harmony to the Trinity right below it. So we see a syncretism, a combination of Christian and Pueblo people religions. Spirituality and abstraction. One of the more powerful sacred spaces in the U.S. is the Rothko Chapel in Houston, Texas. It functions both as a non-denominational sanctuary and an all-enveloping work of art. The Rothko Chapel consists of 14 very large 14-foot paintings. Rothko had long believed that his paintings offered people something akin to a religious experience. He thought of the painting and the chapel as an imaginative space into which the viewer was invited to enter. So there is a ceiling window that lets light into this chapel. And what appears to be black paintings, when the light shines on it, we see all these different colors underneath. We see plum and browns and black. So the lighting, as the sun moves across the sky, the paintings slowly change in their color. Rothko was a deeply spiritual person. He believed that he was painting silence. You know, when you're meditating and you're in total silence, that's when revelation comes to you. And these paintings are something that invite you into it. There's no image for you to grasp onto. So you project yourself into this, onto these canvases. And remember that it is the viewer that often brings content to the work of art. So through contemplation and silence and meditation, one can have a religious experience in this chapel and the paintings by Rothko. Spirituality and abstraction. The belief that abstraction could offer the viewer a religious experience was first articulated by the painter Wassily Kandinsky. He felt a picture was a sort of sacred space that induced in viewers the same feelings they might experience when entering a church. This can be seen in Composition 7. Wassily Kandinsky was a Russian artist, and in his hometown, every common person had what was called a red corner. And this was a sacred space that was painted red, and it would have paintings of icons and religious symbols, images of people in this corner. He can remember having this religious experience from seeing these paintings in these corners. And he believed that paintings could create a religious experience. And he compared the artist to a person who could play a keyboard of color. And he believed that these abstract paintings could actually cause the soul to resonate, to vibrate. And through color and line, an artist could create a religious experience in a viewer, a person looking at the work. In 1985, Bryce Martin began a series of paintings based on the poems of the 9th century Buddhist hermit Cold Mountain. He adapted the calligraphic structure to the flow of a kind of restrained Jackson Pollock-like line. And he based his painting on the poetry Cold Mountain. So this poet took his name from Cold Mountain. After reading these, he became interested in this idea of these monks that would go out in nature on a spiritual quest. And the Cold Mountain 6 bridge is referring to this bridge that one can cross over to the other side in life. And this other side is the side of eternity. So Bryce Martin has developed a painting composition based on calligraphy from poetry from this bridge. Spirituality and abstraction. The paintings are meant to reflect something of the spiritual reverence for nature. The painting represents a kind of spiritual quest that may lead to enlightenment. Bill Viola explained that in the reflecting pool, he is trying to get at the original notion of baptism in a way. Viola explores similar themes in his room for St. John of the Cross. And this is a video still person that has come before the reflecting pool. They end up jumping into the water, into a sort of baptism. But in contemplating the illusory nature of life, we see the reflection of the pool. Sometimes we don't see what was really beneath the water, but we see the illusion of the reflection instead. And in this image, rune for Saint John of the Cross. Saint John of the Cross was a Christian mystic who wrote some very beautiful poems. And he got in trouble from not following the orders of some friars. He was kind of close with Saint Teresa of Avila. We've seen her work from Bernini's sculpture. And he didn't follow some of the rigid laws of the friar. And for that, they locked him up in a tiny room, gave him nothing but water. In this time, he wrote some poetry and he dreamed about his spirit flying free through the mountains. And so in this work by Bill Viola, there is a little recording inside the little cell, and we can hear the poetry of St. John. And behind it, we see and hear the sound of the wind flying through the mountains in this piece. This is one of his poems that you would hear at the beginning of it, called The Dark Night of the Soul. In an obscure night, fevered with love's anxiety, O hapless, happy plight, I went, none seeing me, forth from my house, where all things quiet be. So that's just the beginning of that. And I think we will stop there. And I will see you next time.